Hello, everyone, and welcome to another narrator interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is a first timer making her official debut here on the channel. Now, my guest today is a narrator specializing in romance, dark romance, and YA genres. A librarian by profession, my guest holds a master's in library science and has served as a reference and digital services librarian in both colleges and numerous public libraries supporting local communities. Her love for books started at a young age, sparked by reading Interview with a Vampire and becoming captivated by the complexity of its characters. This passion for literature led her to pursue a career in library sciences and eventually into the world of narration. Over the past decade, her fondness for audiobooks grew, inspiring her to train in narration. With the help of authors who offered to provide snippets of their work, she began to practice and share openly her progress as an aspiring narrator. In 2024, she officially launched her professional narration career with the support of authors who trusted her with their work. And together with her husband, she runs their independent studio, offering bilingual narration in both English and Spanish, as well as editing, audio mixing, and mastering services. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, narrator and librarian, Mariana Olmeda. Mariana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi. Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem, Mariana. So, before we dive into your background as a librarian as well as a narrator, is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers and listeners? Anything that wasn't mentioned in the introduction?
No, actually, that was very thorough.
All right, all right. So, just as a little tidbit or little teaser, do you have any upcoming projects you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners? Any audiobooks that you are working on with authors in the community?
So right now I'm finishing, I'm going to be sending out the files soon for it's a basketball college romance. It's called Man Coverage by Rosie P. Burke. So that should be soon and Audible. Hopefully they'll, approve it soon enough. I have another project coming in the summer. I can't say anything about it yet, but I'm super beyond excited because it's an author that I really love. I have another project in November. It's a dark romance, kind of
Ooh.
like stalker kind of thing, with an author that I've had a really good rapport with, and she reached out and she wanted, me and my husband to do the book for her. So far, those are the only things that I have lined up for now.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it sounds like you're going to be very, very busy from now until when the book releases, which is very, very exciting. So,
Yes.
before we dive into your current work as well as previous work, let's talk a little bit about you, Mariana. So, let's start at the beginning. So, in your bio, you sort of joined into, or rather, dived into the world of storytelling and narration from Interview with the Vampire at a very young age. Now, how did this lead you down a path to not only working as a librarian, being surrounded by all these incredible works of fiction and nonfiction, but also into the world of narration and voiceover work?
So at a very young age, I love to read. That was instilled by my mom. My mom was an avid reader. And she would, every time that she would finish a book, she would just recommend it. And it was like one back and forth. So that love for books, it just escalated into wanting to become a librarian. So originally, I was actually thinking of becoming an English teacher. And then things just progressed. And I was like, you know what? Maybe that's not my path. And once I started learning that I'm more inquisitive, I'm looking for more information about certain
Mm,
things, that I said, like, my combination of my love for books plus like researching stuff, because I always love to do that. Like something intrigues me, I have to find out more about it. So that combination, I was like, you know what, maybe librarianship is what's good for me. And I went to school to that, and I found so many fascinating things about librarianship that if you didn't know about it, you're like, oh, well, you work at a library, that means you read all day. No, no, we don't. So that kind of propelled me to keep moving forward, keep learning. And with my love for books, I started this like the whole book talk, bookstagram thing. I
Right.
just leaped into it and said, like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I read so many amazing books that I could just use my voice and give suggestions, right? And starting through that, through the whole book talk and bookstagram community, I saw little like people doing little snippets of like it was like contest or something like that with different authors, different narrators, to win credits for Audible or something like that. So
Right.
I decided to do it. Just like, I've always thought about doing it, but I was like, yeah, maybe this is not for me. Um, so I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do those little snippets, see if I win an Audible credit. And I did. And
Ooh,
I was like, okay,
nice.
well, that's great. Okay, well, I'm going to keep doing these little, projects and stuff that people post online on TikTok or whatever. And one of those, a gentleman had actually reached out. Was like, "Oh, I love your voice. I would love you to narrate this book for me." It's like, I am not a professional in this. I have no idea. This is just me goofing around. After like the third or fourth person that reached out, I was like, you know what? Maybe there is something to this. So that's why I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this more seriously. I'm not just going to do little games or stuff like that. I'm going to try and move with this career. And I am beyond happy that I decided to do that.
Awesome. That is really, really good to hear, Mariana. So, would you consider that to be your aha moment, the moment where you realize you want to take your passion for voice work and narration and transform it from simply just a hobby on the side to now building a career and building your brand with you and your husband?
100%. That has been like it was the affirmation that I needed because I've been thinking about it. My husband works in music. He has his own music studio and I've been thinking about doing it. And he was like, "Well, then do it." I'm like, I don't think I have the voice for it. I don't think I have like the chops for it." He's like, "Just go for it." I'm like, "Whatever. I'm not going to do it." But then when I started getting that feedback from it was like very little lines and little paragraphs of something that was not like it's not like actual work. It was just people writing stuff, and I was just reading it online, and I was like, people actually like that, and I was like, okay, well then maybe I do have the chops for it. So yes, definitely, that moment was like, okay, you need to do this.
Awesome, Mariana. Awesome. That's really, really incredible. And I love talking with narrators about, the whole voiceover work and, narrating books because before I, learned anything more about narration from other colleagues in the industry, most people think, oh, it's just, reading in books or, just reading characters. There's a lot more to it. You have to like train your voice to, go like a certain pitch for one character or go a higher pitch and, like train your voice so you don't, stress it out and you can't talk. And it's a lot of work. It's not just, oh, you're just making funny voices for certain characters or reading a certain style. No, in a way, it is acting because you really have to sell these characters if someone is listening. Because if the reader's not engaged from how the character is being presented or how the story is being read, that's not really good. So let's jump forward ahead in history to where you just started your business. So, do you remember the first project you worked on as a narrator, and what can you tell us about it?
So the very first project, excuse me. So originally, I when I did the whole book talk thing, I had reached out to different authors, say like, "Hey, would you mind if I read like a chapter of your book online just to see how it sounds?" And from there, I was able to get some projects. Um, but my very first project, I went through ACX, which usually a lot of us like starting narrators. That's the first go to
Mm,
ACX because you can do like different projects that based on genre and stuff like that. So I had auditioned for this book called Forever Single by Samantha Baca. And immediately after I submitted my audition, I was like, you know what, maybe I'm not going to get it. And like, I don't know, it was 5 hours later, I just received oh, you've been offered, this book. And I was like, oh my God, that really happened. So for me, that was my very first book. It was like a fireman, I don't know, small town romance kind of thing. And it was
Okay.
so much fun because you actually, and a lot of people don't tell you this, but when you start into narration, unless you don't actually work on a book, you have to, before you start working on this book, you really have to try and record any book on the side that you're not going to publish or anything like that. It's just to show yourself that you know how to do it.
Right.
Exactly. So, but even though you do that, you still, this is on yourself. But when you start working with an author, that's different because you need their feedback. You need to learn, oh, these characters are this, so they can map, give you the information about the characters. So for me, it was an even more learning experience than just doing it by myself and making sure that I know how to do it. Because in this case, it's learning these characters. You have to make sure that you're portraying correctly what the author has written, and you want to make sure that it matches, because it would be very disappointing that you do something and the author was like, well, I didn't really think that that person's voice was like that. So for me, it was an additional learning experience. It was so much fun coming up with all of these characters and these voices. Um, I don't know. It was just, it was so much fun, and I was so thankful with the author. She was always giving me feedback, and it was just an amazing experience. So if you ever like look at it on Audible, it's called Forever Single.
Awesome. And that's actually really, really important too, because it is an audition, because you do want to, sell yourself and really show your vocal range, which again goes back to this topic that narration and voiceover work is acting, because you really want
Mhm.
to showcase your talent and range. And one thing I've also learned from a lot of other friends in the narration industry, a shout out to Sophia Dujardot of Belvox Studios, she said that, when it comes to narrating like a lot of characters, that's also very integral to for the narrator, because they have to realize, okay, I really like this book, but I gotta be frank with the author in the sense that I can't do like all of these voices. And that's also really, really true, viewers and listeners. Like if you want to work with a narrator, be mindful of, the characters that you are writing. And what I mean by that is, do these characters have specific voices and accents? Because it's easy to do, let's say, a Midwest accent, a Southern accent, a New England accent. Those are least easy to do. But if you're in a fantasy setting and you're really, really trying to have it go in this direction, it's going to be difficult for the narrator, which I'm very curious, Mariana, when you were working with this author, did they provide any, what's the word, voice examples from other media of how they imagine this character was sounding to help you out so that way you can craft the voice? Or was it open ended as like, here's the bio of this character, have fun?
It was mainly that. I haven't had a situation just yet. I'm hoping at some point, um, just so that I could get a sense of it. I did not get any of that. It was just like, go with it, see what happens, and I'll let you know if I like it or not, and then we can go from there. The only thing is that when it comes to voice narration, once you do the things, it's good to have rapport with the author, so
Hmm.
that way you can get a sense of, okay, this is what I'm looking for this character. This is the type of range I want you to look into. This is,
Right.
but no clips or anything I was given. So it was more of those like, I give you the 15 minutes, you're okay with my 15 minutes of what I've narrated, and we just move forward. So I personally like that whole original rapport with the author, so they can give me kind of a sense of what exactly the character is, where they're located from, where they're from. And obviously, as a narrator, just like as an author,
Hmm.
we have to be like, we have to be honest, like, no, I can't do that accent. I'm not familiar with it. I don't feel comfortable doing that. Because yes, I could sit down and in a couple of weeks try and learn that accent, but will it be authentic? So
Absolutely.
it's one of those things that you have to also like work with the author. But yeah, no, I never got any sound clips or anything. It was just like, have at it.
All right, all right, nice. So, when you began working on this project, what were the goals you had for yourself as a narrator in the sense that, okay, I'm working on this project, I want this to be, the very best of the author's work, but also showcasing my talent. But also, what were your promises to the author's readers? Is that when you were talking with the author, going back and forth, like how the story is going, how it's flowing, how the characters are developing through the narration. What did you want ultimately a reader to what's the word I'm thinking of? Get from, listening to this book as opposed to simply just reading it and imagining the voices in their head.
I think it's authenticity. You want to make sure that it's more not just about the readers, it's about the author because they are the ones that created those characters.
Hmm.
They want to see those characters come to life. And my job and my promise to those authors is that I will try my damnness to make it as close as possible to the person that they hear in their head when they started writing them. As for the listener, same thing. I want to make it as authentic as possible. I want to make sure that what they envision when they've read it, because me as a reader, I tend to, if I really love the book, I tend to read the book and then I do the audiobook. So
Mm,
it's one of those things that if you're just going into the audiobook, you just take it face value because you don't know anything really about the characters at that point because you've never read the book. But for those of us like me who've already read the book and have this vision of who this person is, and then go into the book audiobook and you're like, "Oh, that's not exactly who I thought it would be."
mm.
Um, I try to make sure that I have that connection with the author to make sure exactly what is it that they needed. And then from there, I'm hoping that the listener will see, hey, this is what the author was envisioning and hope you enjoy it. So for me is to be as authentic as possible, try to have that rapport with the author, get as much information as I can, and try to match exactly what the author envisioned. And hoping, that the listener would enjoy it, I guess.
Absolutely. That's very well spoken, Mariana. That's very, very well spoken because it is, it is true. You do want to have that authenticity and you also want to make sure that it's authentic to the author's original vision and, the integrity of the characters. Now, granted, there will be some discussions down the road of like, how would the characters speak in like this sentence or like the flow. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. But from that point on, working with the author and, developing the story, and the characters. What was the reaction like from friends and family when they learned that you were working on your first narration project?
Um, my husband obviously was the one working with me with this, so he was like super excited that I finally took the plunge and did it. My aunt was like, "I knew you would get into something like this because you have an excellent voice," and I'm like, "Okay, sure, why not?" It's like, "I don't think you want to listen to what I'm narrating, though." So I was like, my sister was very excited. She was like, "Oh my goodness, I knew you would get into something like that." With my friends, they were also like not surprised that I did something like this. So they were very excited. Thankfully, I don't have any friends who've listened to any of my work because my stuff that I do narrate is spicy romance. So it's one of those like, oh yeah, I did a great job, but I don't want you to listen kind of situation. But
Oh
they were
boy.
very excited.
Awesome. Well, that's very good. It's really good. And as a little fun question, have you ever, maybe on your break as like working in the libraries, have you ever picked up a book and just silently in your head imagine what the characters in those books would sound like?
All the time. All the time. Even when I'm like reading a book that the book hasn't come out in audio yet or anything like that. And I'm just reading the book and I was like, oh, this guy could sound like this. Oh, and I don't know how to do certain accents. So it's like in my head, I kind of hear what the person would sound with the accent. I can't just do it like verbally. I don't know if that makes any sense. That you
Right,
can hear
right.
something in your head, but you can't actually say it out loud. So yeah, every time, all the time, I do that. And then I catch myself, I'm just sitting there reading and then I'm just trying to say it out loud. And I'm like, this could sound like this. This could sound like that. So, yes, all the time.
All right. And kind of building onto that, have you ever, read a book? Well, actually, let me tie it back to your first project, your first narration project. Let's say you're probably, working with one of the characters and you really were kind of struggling of like, how they would sound. Like, even if you had the background, the bio, the everything, it's kind of hard to like imagine, okay, well, what would he sound like? And then let's say working at a library, you were picking up a book just for fun, maybe on break, but then you're reading it and then you're saying, oh, wait, he kind of matches this character that I'm working on. And then you're developing the voice in your head. Have you ever had that moment where it's like just by accident, you kind of discovered what the character's voice from the book you're working on from something else entirely?
Actually, no, but I will tell you this. Again, since I work at the library, we do get a lot of people coming in and coming out.
Mm.
And there was one character, I don't remember, I cannot remember what the character was, but I had a gentleman come into the library, and the way he talked, I was like, "Oh my God, I can hear that voice on this character." So I kind of
Oh,
stole that
okay.
man's kind of stole that man's voice as best I could to be able to match it, but not with books, but with people. I like to people watch. It's good to it's especially when you're acting, it's good to because you're only stuck with what you see on a daily. So
Right.
if you just sit down and listen to people talking and mannerisms and stuff like that, you're like, oh, okay, I can grab this information and make it my own. So that's one of the suggestions I would say. Like if you're at a park or something, just sit down and like listen to people watch, and you'll get a bunch of inspiration.
Nice. Now, going back to the author for this book, what was their reaction like after hearing, some of the dialogue from the characters? What was their reaction like? Was it positive, maybe critical on some parts, or like an even 50-50?
So she was really happy with it. The only thing that I saw a character a certain way, and she was like, maybe let's change it to a little bit like this to more closely match this other character, because of the age and the similarities that they have. So I was like, okay. So I had to kind of, because I do both female and male narration. So the
Right.
books that I've worked on so far have been just like dual, but just me narrating. So when it comes to male characters, it does take a little bit because you only have so much range to work with how many characters you
Mm.
can make, for me anyways. So I had to use the same male voice, but like lower it a little bit more so that I could have a little bit of a distinction from one character to the other because these two people are like best friends. So how do you make a scene where it's technically the same voice, two people talking without it sounding like, oh, it's the same person talking? So that was the only feedback that I did get from her when I submitted my like 15 minutes, was that, oh, I think the voice sounds too old or a little bit older than what I envisioned or what the character is.
Mm.
So I had to tweak it to be the same as the main male character, but a little lower of a pitch, which was kind of tricky.
Right, absolutely. And we'll actually talk about that when we get, the business side of being a narrator, really formatting those voices and learning from them. Before we get to that, there's actually another question that I want to hear your thoughts on, which is this, you know, sense of validation where you felt validated by, the response you got that, it's one thing to go into an industry, bring everything you can into it, and do your very best, which is what we can ask from anyone. It's another thing entirely when you get positive feedback and people say, this is the industry that you were meant to be in. So, when working on that first book, did you get that sense of validation from not just the author, but also family and friends who watched this project unfold until it was finally released?
So I so how I would see it, not so much with like just the book that I created that one, since again I started very early on, basically kind of like exposing what I'm
Mm.
doing to my group of people that followed me on like Book Talk and Bookstagram, letting them know, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. Any feedback would be great. So I kind of threw myself out there so that multiple people can tell me if I'm doing a good job or not.
Right, right.
So thankfully, as I did these little chapters from different authors, the authors themselves like, oh, this is great, I really loved it, I'm so glad. Maybe in the future, if I decide to do something like this, I would really love for you to audition for it. So it has been really good feedback in general when it comes to like stuff that I've narrated in the past, not just this one. I haven't really checked. I'm not the type of person that would check my own reviews or anything like that, because reviews are for listeners, not for us narrators or like authors or anything like that. But
Right.
so far that I've received directly, they've really enjoyed what I've done with the characters. So, and the book talk people, bookstagram people that follow me was like, "Oh, this is great. Let us know if you have any projects." So that for me was like, "Okay, I can do this. This can be done."
Awesome. And that kind of leads into another question, the first reflective question, which You just touched on, when you were saying, going on BookTok, Bookstagram, and showcase, the little snippets of your work, and, saying like, hey, I'm going into this industry. What do you think? Because I definitely feel in the creative world, in the creative industry, whether that's music, writing, narration, or some form of creativity, you know, there is a level of vulnerability that we showcase to our followers and to people who enjoy the things that we do. And, with the rise of social media, it's a 50-50. It's a double edged sword because, yes, we're able to showcase our work to a wide range of people and get, collaboration, whether that's authors, sound mixers, fellow voiceover artists, or collaboration in general. But on the other side of the coin, we do leave ourselves exposed to, unfortunately, negativity, hate speech, trolls, spam, etc. It can be very detrimental to a person's mental health and their well-being, and that imposter syndrome in the back of everyone's mind is always going to be there. Like, case in point, another colleague of mine who also started off in the narration industry, she herself told me that she was contacted by a world-renowned author, and she was very, very nervous. It's like, this person reached out to me. I don't know if I can do it. I mean, this person has an established audience through years. Here I am just starting off just early on. I'm still in my infancy stage, and they reached out to me because they believe in me. But do I believe in myself? Am I the right person? And all of that, again, could deteriorate a person's self confidence. So, for you, Mariana, have you ever had those moments of maybe heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue down this career path?
I have all the time. It's one of those things that you always question, even if you're an author, a writer. I'm sorry, if you're a narrator, if whatever, if you're creative in any kind of medium, an artist, a painter, doesn't matter. You will always get that imposter syndrome. It's one of those things that you can. Is my work good enough? Am I good enough to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you get to the point, and I'm going to be very honest, the only reason why I haven't really said like, okay, well, maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe this is not something that I should be doing. It's a constant frustration.
Right.
But I've had so much backup with other narrators that are also starting or have been in the business not as long as other narrators, but they've moved forward, that we kind of like push each other, like, come on, you don't, you know that that's not true, and you kind of push each other together to keep moving forward. um because it is kind of mentally, you're like, is this really what people might like? And the thing is that I always, you're not going to be, people are not all, not everybody's going to love you. Not everybody's going to say, oh, this is the perfect person, or no, I didn't really like them. It's always going to be like that no matter what medium you work with.
Absolutely.
So it's like you have to get in your head like, well, maybe that person might not like you, but maybe 50 people will. So that's kind of like, apart from the backup and the group of people that work with me, obviously my family, my husband is always like pushing me, like, get that out of your head. You're doing great. Don't act that way. You just move forward because you're doing a great job. And I think a sense of community is one of those things that also help a lot. Apart from thinking, okay, well, I'm not $100 bill. Not everybody's gonna like me. So you have to just keep moving forward. But yeah, I think for me, it's been more about like the sense of community,
Mm.
other narrators, even other readers that have been like, "No, you're doing great. Keep moving." That has helped a lot.
Absolutely. And going on this topic of community, there is one thing I did want to hear your thoughts on, Mariana, and it is this sense of this golden age of creators. And for those who know what I'm referring to, so a while ago, a previous guest of mine, Jasmine Young, posted something on her socials talking about the golden age of creators, whether that's authors, narrators, musicians, artists, whatever. And she said that this sort of golden age emerged during the lockdown period, those 4 years of quarantine, the pandemic and so forth. And it really got me thinking, as you know what, she's kind of right, because I was one of those creators during those years. I was writing in like 2019, 2020 with my first four books, and three of those are already published, with my fourth one coming out soon. Don't know when, but it will be coming out this year. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Mariana. And in your opinion, do you believe a golden age did emerge during those 4 years in lockdown?
I believe so. People were really looking for ways to, obviously a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people, and some people had been thinking about doing kind of these things like starting with their music or starting with voice narration. I know a lot of narrators that started after that they finally said, you know what, I'm going to take the plunge, because not just monetary wise, although a lot of people were looking for that, because I need to work, I need to see what I can do, and maybe I can use my talent to get that. I believe that yes, a lot of people in the industry have really gotten into like voice narration. Even podcasting had was like soaring. Podcasting has always been a thing, but it
Hmm.
really soared after the pandemic. So I think that it kind of did like a boom for people to actually say, you know what, this happened, I'm just going to move forward and do the thing that I want, because you never know what's going to happen next. So I think that that's what really happened. People were like, well, maybe I just need to move forward and do the thing that I want to do, because we don't know what's going to happen next. So I think so, it is 100%, I agree with that.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads perfectly now into the business portion of the interview, the business side of being a narrator. So, as a little icebreaker, Mariana, when you began down this path, how much research did you go into, building your profile as a narrator, as well as, the equipment you would need? Because I know that that's also important too, the different mics, soundproofing the room. I know your husband, as you said, is a musician, so he probably has his own equipment. And I'm wondering if he may have helped you figure out, hey, you're gonna need this kind of mic, or maybe you need these kinds of stuff to like soundproof the walls, or how to approach, a role like this. So, how much research did you go into to like build your brand as a narrator?
So equipment wise, I'm gonna be very honest. It was all my husband. We have a studio at home. Yeah, I'm not even gonna lie about that. We have a studio at home, and what he did is that he built a booth within the studio. Since I already have this is soundproofed, he was like, "Well, let's do this." He has a bunch of mics because he records bands, so he has a bunch of mics. He
Mm,
had a bunch of interfaces, and we just played around with the mics to see which one worked best with my voice, because that's the thing, depending on how your voice works is depending on the mic that you should be able to you should be using, excuse me. And some mics work great, others sounded either too deep, either is too high, and it didn't have that in between, because if I had to change voices, if I'm doing a male voice, if I'm doing a female voice, will that change how it's going to sound when I'm narrating? So he actually taught me all about it. I didn't know anything about DAWs. We work with Logic Pro, so it's one of those
mm,
things that I had to like start learning how to use Logic Pro so that I know how to like at least edit a little bit, because he does all of the mastering, mixing, and the primary editing. But if I can work on it, so it was like a crash course on all of this.
mm,
Um, and I was able to learn all of this when I started just doing my practices, before I started actually diving into actually auditioning. When I started doing these little things for social media, that's when I started learning how to use all of this program, all of these mics, the positioning, how far away you have to be, how close you have to be, where you should have the mic so it doesn't bounce the sound. I learned all of that in that little span of time, so that I could at least showcase in those little snippets that I know what I'm doing, basically.
absolutely. And then, going back to, your projects and working on narration, I'm very curious to hear about, how you were able to like understand who the audience was. And what I mean by that is, as authors, we know who the audience is, like the target audience, because first and foremost, when we write our books, we know the audience as ourselves. But when we share it with people, we really have to think of, okay, I'm branching out. I now have a good idea of the genre. I know what I'm marketing to. That's how the book's going to be written to. So I'm curious, Mariana, How much of the discussion of that were you a part of in terms of like, understanding the audience? And in your opinion, Mariana, when should the narrator consider the audience for the author? Like during the initial testing phases, before we get like to say like, okay, we have the characters, we know what they sound like, boom, let's go record, or during the process, like in the middle of, narration.
So it's important to do it before. And in regards to what you mentioned about the genre, I am the audience. So I am an avid reader of like romance and dark romance.
Mm,
So I knew that was something that I wanted to go into. So again, being part of like the whole book talk, bookstagram community,
right,
I had feedback from people who were also reading and listening these authors and these books. So I was like, so I get a sense of how to market, I guess, for those specific genres and know about those specific genres because I am the audience for it. As for the narration, it's important to know this stuff prior to you diving in and narrating it because you want to get a sense of everything prior to you putting the commitment of, let's say your book is 12 hours long, or maybe it's a fantasy book, it could be 25 hours long. So before you get into that, you have to have a sense of everything. The people you're going to be marketing to, obviously marketing is a split between like the author and the narrator. Sometimes the author puts more marketing into it than the narrator does.
right.
But right. So it's one of those things that you have to know about prior to doing this. And if you're wanting to break through to a specific genre, like, oh, I've always wanted to go into sci-fi, read a sci-fi book, get acquainted with that genre before you do anything, before you commit yourself in doing something that you're like, well, maybe this is not something I personally could do. So I think it is important before you do anything, you have to acclimate yourself with that specific genre. Um, because else you're not going to do a good job if you don't know like how the audience is going to react to it.
Absolutely. And going on to this discussion, like readership, because in the publishing industry, there, as I've now been aware of, there's four levels of readership in fiction, in particular. You have middle grade, YA, NA, and AF. And each readership has its own set of rules in terms of what you can write about and what is absolutely a red flag and a hard pass. Now, you, Mariana, as you say, you are an avid reader of YA, romance and dark romance. But I understand that as a narrator, there are certain things that you may not be comfortable saying as opposed to reading from a reader's point of view.
Mm.
So when establishing, your brand as a narrator, did you also talk with your authors, those who worked with you, saying, what you were comfortable reading and what was a hard no, like there's no exception?
It's always important. I thankfully there's only certain things that I will not do when it comes to narration. Even as a reader, I will not read stuff about that. Everything else is fine if they come up with like they tell me, okay, this is what's going to happen. So just like with any book, they like list the trigger warnings, or if you go online to the website of the author, you can read the trigger warnings. So if I can get that information beforehand and say like, okay, well then yeah, I'm fine with this. Or I could just outright mention this is the only thing that I'm not going to narrate. And if it appears in the book, well then unfortunately we can't work together. But it depends on the author. Like if the author is outright, here's the book, here's the Goodreads or whatever,
Right.
Amazon information, whatever it is, and I read it and it's like, oh, okay, this sounds really interesting, and there's trigger warnings and the information is not mentioned there, we're good to go. We'll do it. No problem. Um, but yeah, that's the only thing. I can narrate most of everything. It's just that one thing. I can't do it. But other than that, I always research the author, the actual book. I read the blurbs. I read the reviews to see what other, you know, readers are list, what they think about the book and stuff like that, and say, is this something that I can do? So that usually that's how it goes.
Absolutely. And I think it's also very important for authors to really understand when it comes to like, writing a book and then transforming that into Audible or some kind of narrative book. Really understand that you may write very descriptive, and I've also written very descriptive in my work, but when it comes to the narrator reading that, be mindful that you don't want to be too descriptive, too graphic, especially if it's, let's say, dark fantasy, dark romance, and there's a lot of trigger warnings in those books, and there are certain chapters that are going to be very uncomfortable. Because also, again, the narrator is going to be reading this, viewers and listeners. You don't want them to be very uncomfortable reading a part of your book if they're already invested in it. And unfortunately, they'll say, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, it's getting too much for me, and they have to drop out, because then you're left with a book that's partially read and partially narrated, and now you have to find something else, someone else, and your readers are instantly going to notice that there's a tone difference from the different narrators. So just
Right.
be mindful of that, viewers and listeners. Again, you do want to have your book as the authentic version of itself as you wanted. Just be mindful of who's reading it, in terms of, don't be very graphic, don't be very overtly descriptive for certain scenes, because I've learned that from a lot of my friends in the narration industry who have had to read books that were a little risque in terms of description. And I am actually curious on another thing to hear your thoughts on, Mariana, is, of course, understanding, going back to this idea of, what we're capable of doing, as narrators, what we're comfortable working on, this balance of, your individuality as a narrator, but also possibly researching other narrators of how they approach certain characters or certain scenes. So, and what I mean by that is, we don't want to, just like as authors, we don't want to write like anybody else. Yes, we're going to be influenced by other people of the past that we've admired. It's probably the same thing for narrators, that you're probably going to be inspired by how a narrator approaches this character, or how they approach this part of the book. Maybe the tone's a little different. Maybe it's a little more sinister. Maybe it's a little more subtle, whatever. But you don't want to outright copy them, but rather
Right.
balance the two. So, how have you been able to balance these internal scales for you in particular?
I'm actually I do see what other like narrators do just to get a sense of, but I actually just try to do it like myself, like
Hmm.
whatever my voice would be like and how would I approach it and how I would, like, I listen to audiobooks on a daily. So I see what these authors, the cadence that they utilize in, all of this stuff, the emotions that they react in certain situations during the book. And that's great. But I don't actually try and like really grab the information. I just go with it. Whatever I have, it's just doing what it comes out as is.
Hmm.
Um Cadence and stuff like that. When I started, I was going too fast. It's one of the things that I think that a lot of narrators, when starting, they're trying to like, let's move it and move it to get the book done. The only thing that I did learn is the cadence. It's like, okay, I need to slow it down. This is how you would do it and all that stuff. But I don't actually try and mimic or try to take anything from any of the other narrators. I'm just looking, okay, they did it this slowly, they did this a little bit faster, they're using this for this area, but I'm not trying to mimic exactly what they're doing, because I think everybody has their own individual voice and how they react to certain scenes or how they would act in certain scenes. And the amount of narrators that I've listened to, I can 100% tell you that everybody is so individual. There's nothing that would say, "Oh, this reminds me of this
Right.
narrator," whatsoever. So I think that's how I normally approach it.
Okay, that's fair. That's very fair. And this kind of leads into another discussion, which I would very much love to hear your thoughts on, because it is very interesting. Now, again, come back to a lot of my previous narrator friends, whenever they've worked on projects, they often found it easier when a book is written not in the traditional book format, but it's been reworked to almost mimic a screenplay, where you have like the chapter, what's happening in this chapter, and then you have, okay, this character speaking first, and then dialogue, exposition, 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 dialogue. So that way it's easy for the narrators to figure out, okay, this person's going to be talking most times, and then this new character pops in. And they said that it's, in their opinion, easier to read and get the fullest version of their talent as opposed to reading the book in its traditional form and maybe getting lost along the way. So, man, in your opinion, which do you think is easier for a narrator to work with? A book that's sort of transformed into a screenplay format for them to read like a script from a movie, or just in its traditional book format?
I guess it depends on the narrator. I haven't had that yet happen where the book is more like if it was like a screenplay as opposed to just like reading out a book out loud.
Mm,
Um, I would assume that it would be a lot easier because obviously you get more information about the character, you get more range of emotion, what is happening, as opposed to just a regular just book. I, as a narrator, have to, or at least try to work with the author to get a sense of, okay, this is what we do. So part of the prepping process is reading the chapter. And I'm not saying that this is done like everybody does it,
right.
but one of the things that is helpful is like reading the chapter, okay, getting a sense these are the characters that are going to be there. This is what's happening, get a little summary of what it is. That way it's easier for you when you actually go in and act it out. You can do it with that information that you already have because you already read that chapter and so on and
Mm,
so forth. I would assume, obviously, since I that's an additional step that we would do as prepping, that if it's already written for you, then obviously that would be a whole lot easier than you having to do it. So I would assume that the script format would be a whole lot easier for a narrator. But again, it depends on the narrator how they like to approach things.
absolutely, 100%. And that was just a little fun question. Has your husband, who I said is a musician, helped you with a scene in the sense that maybe providing a little music cue of like, what's happening in the scene to get like an idea, like, okay, this song is like giving me the feeling like, maybe there's a little bit of dread or maybe there's some like big happening. Has that ever happened working on a project before?
No, no, not yet. I'm assuming at some point, yes, but no, not yet. It's been more of maybe because he does the editing and all the stuff, he'll be like, oh, hold on, maybe you said this too quickly, or hold on, maybe we need to do this, or he'll give me feedback. But other than that, we haven't had anything more extensive than that.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. But it is kind of like, definitely something to consider, like maybe little music cues, maybe has its own. What instruments does your husband play, if I may ask?
Oh yeah, he's a guitarist but he's played bass, he's played drums, piano, so he's kind of versatile with all of that right now. He has his own
All right.
band, yeah.
Nice, because that'd be really cool to possibly consider, like down the road, like maybe little music cues in like certain parts of the book, like maybe just to help you just get like a sense, like okay, this is happening, little music cue, almost like as little reminders, like ooh, that's really good. But again, it also depends on the narrator and what works best for them.
Mhm.
And this kind of leads into another reflective question, which is a very big one, Mariana. So just brace yourself. It's a very loaded question. So I've been doing this show now for almost 7 years. I checked on my profile, 300 videos, 200 subscribers, with this episode being 301, which is crazy. I've interviewed historians, fellow authors, which range from indie, hybrid, traditional, voiceover artists, narrators, editors, the works. And I've learned a lot from everybody. And I've understood that in this industry, whether you're an editor, narrator, or an author, or even a publisher, there are two roads that we all seem to follow: to be this thing or to be known as this thing. If you are willing to be a narrator, or rather say to be a narrator, is someone who's dedicated to the art of storytelling through words, through immersive storytelling, where you can help the reader really visualize what they're seeing in their head. And to be known as a narrator is someone who is trying to build their presence, their brand, working with well known authors to really get their books out there and really just create a name for themselves. And ultimately, both have their own set of hurdles and obstacles along the way, leading to the same goal, which is critically acclaimed or world renowned success. But I definitely do feel, you maybe you agree with this, that the second path to be known as this is the most enticing, but leads to a lot of unfortunate, unrealistic goals and expectations, which in this industry, again, whether you're a narrator, publisher, author, or editor, there is no guarantee that your first project, no matter what it is going to be the start of your legacy. It's a 50-50 chance. There are
Right.
exceptions to the rule, of course, absolutely, in any industry, but generally speaking, you have highs and lows. And sometimes, if you go into an industry for the wrong reasons, your passion for it is going to die. And that's another thing I've learned too, is never make your passion into your profession, like just starting out, because if you try to make this your sole source of income, it's not going to work. And that's a thing to viewers and listeners. The publishing industry, whether you're, again, editor, narrator, publisher, or author, it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's absolutely not. Would we absolutely love that to be the case? Yes, I
Yes.
would easily be a full time author, and I'm sure you, Mariana, would definitely love to be a full time narrator with just loads and loads of authors to work with to just get the books out there. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And we have to be realistic about this. Not to say that we couldn't down the road, it just takes a lot of time. So
Hmm.
ultimately, Mariana, here is the question that yes, in this industry, there is no guarantee that your first project is going to be the start of your legacy, but that shouldn't deter somebody from wanting to pursue their passion if they're truly passionate about this industry. Do you agree with that, or do you not agree with this sentiment?
No, I agree 100%. And you have to do it because you're passionate about it. It's not because of the like the reward that you're going to get at the end, other than the reward that you did something that you really loved doing, like getting like,
Mm,
oh, I did this for myself, because that's the whole point. This is not doing because you're going to be getting paid for it, or oh, they're going to recognize you and give you these awards. No, you do it because it's a passion that you love. Just with any artist, anybody who's painting or drawing, or anybody that's doing videos or music or whatever it might be, that medium that you follow, you have to do it because you love it, not because you're going to get monetary compensation or you're going to get a bunch of accolades because of what you did. It's great. That's a bonus to have that. That's wonderful to get that, because it kind of feels like you're being validated, if you will.
right.
But you have to really do it because you love it. This is not going to give you like, once you get to that top thing, yes, you can go ahead and, leave your day job and go ahead and pursue it for as your career. But the thing is that with everything like this, with any medium, sometimes it could lull. Let's say you had a CD. I'm doing musicians. So let's say you had a CD, you had your EP
Right.
that exploded, you became the most awesome person, all this stuff, but then you ended up being a one-hit wonder. So you don't
Mm,
want to just think about it that way. You have to think about it. I loved doing this. It tanked, but it doesn't matter because I pulled and put everything in it, and I knew that I did all the thing that I could do, and this is wonderful, and I loved it. But if you just think about, oh, I'm going to get rich and I'm going to do this because they're going to give me a bunch of awards, it's not going to work out, because you're not going to give it that same passion, that same love, that you would do if it was something that you were doing for yourself. So that's my thinking. But yes, I agree.
100%. That is absolutely true. And thank you for providing that analogy with, a CD for musicians, because, you don't want to view yourself as like, a one hit wonder. Definitely take that as like a learning experience and build upon it, because we only
Right.
get better as time goes on. We learn new skills, we pick up new things, and we just hone our craft more and more, which leads to the next question, which is, of course, networking, which is a huge thing in the publishing
Yes.
industry, whether you're, again, author, narrator, publisher, editor. Networking is huge because you meet a whole bunch of new people, you trade some things, you learn from them, and you also ultimately get new colleagues and friends along the way, which I'm very thankful that almost all the authors that I've had the opportunity to meet, a lot of those are within my inner circle, and we help each other along the way. So, Mariana, are there any people you'd like to give a personal shout out to, family, friends, or friends you've made in the publishing industry that you'd like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you along the way?
Oh my, there have been a lot because like I said, I started with the whole book talk, bookstagram. So I
Right.
had a lot of followers, but those followers of like a handful became like friends, even though we've never met in person. So it was one of those like, hey, can you give me some feedback? Or hey, do you know about this? I have people who work at bookstores, people who are also authors, and it's one of those things. For example, one author that I love her to pieces, and was one of those that really was pushing me to do like, hey, you could do this. Let's like, move forward. I would love you. And then eventually I ended up narrating one of her books. And with my husband, Unethical, this author is Lauren Beale. She has been fantastic. She writes like dark romance, and she has been like every step of the way. She's like, oh, that sounds great. Oh, I love this. And I just started reviewing her books because I loved it so much. So having started this has actually allowed me to make friends with a lot of authors that I would not have, like, if I didn't do this. Like I wouldn't have had that experience or that one-on-one with those. I've had a bunch of narrators that I can say that have been so helpful with anything, any questions that I might have. Paige Rosenfeld is one of those that she is, I want her to adopt me because she is like the most amazing narrator. I like, and I could ask her, and she's a very popular author. I anything like I want her to show me her ways because she is fantastic. Will Watt, who is also one of those narrators, but he is really like a really big narrator, has always been like, I ask him any questions, he'll be like, yes, do this, or he's been fantastic. Like with this community, I've noticed, especially with indie authors and more indie narrators, that they're very open. Like
Yes.
if you're stuck with something, you're like, oh, maybe this is not, or whatever it might be, they are very open about it. So I think a lot of, I can't really mention just pick and choose because there have been so many people, especially like a group of narrators that we've all come together and try to help each other out. Carmen Chantel is one of those that has been super helpful. Ethan Gray is another fantastic. Sammy Rowe, I could keep naming all of these narrators that might not be like super super popular, or maybe just starting out, and we kind of like work everything together. So I think I can't name everybody because they've it's been too many. They've been amazing.
Absolutely, 100%. And as a final question to this incredible narrator interview, Mariana, and I think you may have answered in the beginning, but maybe you can provide a different answer, which is with everything you've learned thus far on your own personal journey, through your own growth and possibly some obstacles along the way, what is your word of wisdom to fellow people who want to get into the narration industry?
Don't give up. It is tough. It's not easy. It's not one of those like, oh, I'm going to record this and then I'm going to be, this is what I'm going to do. No, you have to hone in your craft. If you can take acting classes, which is something that I'm trying to like, I'm going to try and do that. Try and learn new accents. That's very important. You're going to have to learn how to do that. If you want to get more projects and you want to get to be able to do a wider range of characters, you have to know how to do that. Learn about equipment, very important. You have to learn because that equipment is what's going to make your voice sound great. If you don't know about the equipment, if you don't know, figure out which mic works best for you, then it doesn't matter how great you narrate, it's going to sound not great because of the equipment. You're going to have to learn about all of that. Apart from that, I think you keep learning as you go along. This is not something that, okay, I learned this and this is what it's going to be. No, you learn so many things as you go along, depending on the project, depending on the author. If you're going to one of the big fives for a publishing company, they do
Right.
things very differently. So it's one of those things that depending on the production company you go to, maybe they like these types of microphones or like this kind of narration. You don't stop learning. Don't limit yourself on saying, okay, I've learned enough. You won't. You will not learn enough. You have to keep going. And reach out to other narrators, reach out to authors. Um, there are so many people that will help you along the way because this community is fantastic. So don't limit yourself. And again, do not give up because the first instinct, and again, like we mentioned with the imposter syndrome, the
Right.
first thing that you're wanting to do is like, oh, this didn't work out, or oh, this is not working, or I'm not doing this right. Don't stop. because you will get it. You will get to that point, or maybe you're already at that point and you're just second guessing yourself. So don't give up. That's the best thing I guess. Do not give up.
Absolutely. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing narrator interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Mariana for making her official debut here on the channel, and we wish her the very best going forward. Now, Mariana, where can people find you on social media to reach out? And do you have any upcoming projects you would like to share? I know you mentioned them in the beginning, but could you just reiterate them for the ending?
Sure. So I'm on TikTok. All of my socials are narrated by Mariana. TikTok, Instagram. I have Blue Sky. I don't use that much though. I have YouTube, same thing, narrated by Mariana. Books that I'm currently that should be published soon is Man Coverage by Rosie P. Burke. I will be working on a project with a narrator that I really love in the summer. Hopefully we'll get that probably by August. I think they're going to have that published. Um, and if you want to check out stuff that I already have, it's Forever Single by Samantha Baca and Unethical by Lauren Beale. You can find those on Audible. Unethical, you can find it on the library website. Hoopla will have it there. So if you don't want to pay for it, you could just get your library to get it through the library. But yeah, those are the ones that I have right now. And hopefully I'll get some more.
Awesome. I'll provide all those links down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing interview here on the channel. Again, a huge thank you to Mariana for making her official debut here on the channel. And hopefully this won't be the last time. As you know me, I always try to get double interviews, triple interviews. So hopefully down the road, we can do a narrator special with all the narrators that I've had featured on the channel thus far. If you want to see that, comment down below. And speaking of that, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more guests coming out later this week, as well as later this month. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful Friday morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world.